My name is Camila Duarte. I'm 29 years old, and there was a time I believed that silence was strength. I thought if I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed kind, people would eventually see the truth. But I learned that silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it builds the perfect cage for someone else to lock you in. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a modest house with yellow shutters and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of bleach and coffee. My mother worked as a nurse for 30 years, my father was a carpenter, and my sister, Larissa, was the golden one. She had the kind of beauty people noticed in grocery store lines: perfect hair, perfect posture, a smile rehearsed to make others feel smaller. I was quieter, steadier, more comfortable behind the scenes. Even as kids, we lived in different worlds under the same roof. When Larissa laughed too loud, my parents called it charm. When I spoke too softly, they called it weakness. At every dinner, she led the conversation. I passed the dishes. They said I was dependable, a word that sounds like a compliment until you realize it's just another way to say forgettable. If you've ever felt like the quiet one in a family that only notices noise, let me know in the comments. And if stories like this make you think about the weight of loyalty and betrayal, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps more people find these true confessions about what family really means. We both followed in my mother's footsteps and went into healthcare, though in very different ways. Larissa worked in administration at a private clinic, all tailored suits and perfume that smelled like sharp money. I worked as a nurse at the same clinic. Long shifts, tired hands, the scent of antiseptic stitched into my skin. That smell, alcohol and citrus cleaner, became my anchor. It followed me everywhere, the quiet signature of my days. It was during my parents' anniversary dinner in late spring that things began to shift. We were seated around a long table at a family restaurant, the air thick with the smell of garlic bread and wine. Larissa had just returned from a trip to Miami and spoke about it as though she'd been crowned Queen of the Coast. Then, out of nowhere, she decided to remind everyone how I had once messed up a hospital report, a tiny clerical error I'd fixed in minutes, years ago. She said it like a punchline, loud enough for the waiter to hear. My father laughed. My mother rolled her eyes. I tried to smile, but something inside me cracked, subtle as glass under pressure. That night, as Larissa kissed our parents goodbye and complimented her own reflection in the restaurant window, I stood by the parking lot lights and felt the cold hum of humiliation burn through me. I told myself it was just another night, another moment to swallow and forget. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, not just in how they saw me, but in how she did. And the next time Larissa looked at me with that practiced sympathy, I understood it wasn't affection. It was strategy. The first sign that something was wrong came a few weeks after that dinner. I was on the early shift at the clinic, the kind where the fluorescent lights still buzzed louder than the patients, and the smell of disinfectant clung to the air like a film. Larissa wasn't there that morning. Her office door was shut, blinds drawn, which was strange for her. She liked to be seen. The heels, the perfume, the sound of power in her walk. That day there was only silence. By noon, whispers started moving through the corridors. Something about a discrepancy in the clinic's pharmacy records, missing samples, altered invoices, and prescription pads signed under someone else's credentials. I didn't think much of it at first. Things went missing all the time in busy hospitals. But when I passed the administrative wing, I caught sight of two men in suits stepping out of Larissa's office. She was smiling too brightly, her laugh a beat too quick. She waved at me in the hallway, a gesture so casual it made my stomach twist. For days, the tension hung invisible but heavy. Nurses checked the medication logs twice. The doctors whispered in clipped tones. Then one Friday evening, as I was finishing charting vitals, a security officer came to the nurses' station asking for me by name. He was polite, almost apologetic, but his eyes carried the weight of something official. I followed him to the lobby, assuming it was a mistake. Two detectives stood waiting. One of them said my name, then asked if I would come with them for questioning regarding irregularities in the clinic's accounts. I remember the sound before anything else, the echo of my pen hitting the floor. My coworkers froze. The young intern who looked up to me whispered my name, confused. They didn't handcuff me, not yet. But as we walked through the glass doors into the gray afternoon, I felt something inside me separate from the rest of the world. A sharp, clean detachment. My body moved, but my mind was elsewhere, looping through every memory that might explain what was happening. At the station, the questions came fast. Did I have access to the prescription database? Had I used the administrator's login? Did I authorize a transfer of funds to a supplier account that didn't exist? I denied everything, my voice steady even as my palms trembled against the metal table. But when they slid a folder toward me and opened it, my breath caught. Inside were printed receipts, email confirmations, and signatures. Mine. Perfectly forged, but mine. Every page felt like a betrayal written in my own handwriting. They let me make one call. I called my mother. She answered on speaker, her voice clipped, distant. I told her there had been a mistake, that I needed help. She said my father was already aware, that Larissa had called them. Her tone softened only slightly when she said, "Just cooperate, Camilla. We'll sort it out later," but later never came. By midnight, I was in a holding cell that smelled of sweat, metal, and something like bleach. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and I couldn't stop thinking about how that same sterile brightness lived in every clinic room I'd ever worked in. The scent of antiseptic, my comfort, my routine, now felt like mockery. I sat on the cold bench, staring at the concrete floor, trying to understand how my own sister had built this trap. When the officers brought me breakfast the next morning, they told me I'd be released on bail pending investigation. A bond had been posted anonymously. I didn't know then that it wasn't my parents. It was Daniel, a colleague from the ward, the only person who still believed me. I returned to my apartment to find my phone flooded with messages from coworkers, most unreadable in their careful sympathy. My mother had texted once. "We'll talk when this calms down." Larissa, of course, sent nothing. But social media told me what she wouldn't say. Photos of her at brunch, smiling, unbothered, the same manicured perfection. When I went back to the clinic to clear my locker, people avoided my eyes. The head nurse met me at the door, voice shaking as she said the board had decided to suspend me indefinitely. She said the word suspend like it was temporary, but I knew what it really meant. That evening, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by my scrubs, my ID badge, the remnants of the life I'd built through exhaustion and faith. Outside, the rain came in steady waves against the window. Inside, it smelled like nothing, sterile, empty air. I replayed everything, the laughter at that dinner, the way Larissa had brushed my shoulder when she walked past me that night, her too bright smile outside the clinic. Every gesture had been rehearsed, every word a setup. She hadn't just mocked me that night. She'd already started writing the script that would destroy me. And I, too busy trying to be the quiet one, had given her all the silence she needed to finish it. The first weeks after my arrest moved like fog, thick, slow, and disorienting. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary after long hospital shifts, became a place of waiting. Every sound from the hallway made me flinch. I kept expecting someone to knock, to deliver another paper, another accusation. The neighbors, once friendly, now lowered their voices when they passed my door. News travels fast in small apartment buildings. When the official suspension notice arrived in the mail, I sat on the edge of my bed and read it twice. The language was polite, almost tender, as if kindness could soften humiliation. Pending ongoing investigation were the words they chose. They might as well have written, "You're done here." Money vanished quickly. Legal fees, rent, food. It all became arithmetic survival. My savings, which I had planned to use for a small home someday, dissolved in a matter of weeks. I canceled my phone plan, sold my car, and started walking to a temporary job I found as an overnight caregiver for an elderly woman named Mrs. Powell. Her apartment was small, dimly lit, and smelled of lavender and old paper. Every night, I helped her take her medication, tucked her in, and then sat in the armchair beside her bed until morning. She often talked in her sleep, fragments of old memories, names I didn't recognize. I listened to those murmurs like they were prayers. There was something strangely comforting about caring for someone who didn't know anything about me. No judgment, no pity, no gossip, just two people suspended in the same slow hours of night. When dawn came, I walked home under the pale light of early buses and street sweepers. The city looked washed out at that hour, quiet, hollow, like it hadn't decided yet if it wanted to start another day. I'd passed the bakery where Larissa used to buy croissants before work. They still displayed her favorite kind in the window, filled with almond cream. I couldn't look at them without feeling my throat tighten. The weeks turned into months. My parents stopped calling altogether. The only contact came in the form of short, indirect updates from distant relatives. My mother wasn't feeling well. My father needed space. What they never said out loud was the truth. They believed Larissa. I found a small room to rent above a laundromat. The smell of detergent and warm air became my new background noise. Every night, I fell asleep to the rhythm of tumbling dryers, their steady hum strangely similar to the machines that used to fill the hospital corridors. Sometimes I closed my eyes and pretended I was back there, back where my life made sense. But reality had a way of creeping in through the smallest cracks. My mailbox became a collection of official envelopes, court notices, hearing schedules, debt reminders. I stacked them neatly on the counter, unopened, like small tombstones of a life that was no longer mine. One night, as the machines below roared and the air smelled faintly of soap and steam, I started writing. At first, it was just a way to survive the silence. Notes on scraps of paper, lists of things I remembered from the clinic. But soon, those notes became pages. Every date, every patient file I'd ever handled, every conversation with Larissa. I began mapping it out like a detective. The pattern of her shifts, the transactions, the timing. I remembered details I didn't know I had stored. The days she stayed late, the times she borrowed my access card, just for a minute. It wasn't anger that drove me at first. It was the need to make sense of chaos. But slowly, as the evidence in my notebook grew, the emotion changed. It became a pulse, quiet but steady, a mix of rage and purpose. During those long nights at Mrs. Powell's apartment, I'd sit by her window and look out over the streetlights reflecting off parked cars. The world outside seemed calm, almost still, while inside me everything churned. I thought of Larissa's laughter that night at dinner, how effortless cruelty looked on her. And I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. She wasn't careless. She was calculated. Every step of this, the jokes, the forged documents, the silence afterward, had been deliberate. What haunted me most wasn't her betrayal. It was the understanding that she had done it knowing exactly what it would cost me. My career, my name, my parents' love, all collateral for her convenience. Sometimes during my shifts, Mrs. Powell would wake up in the middle of the night and ask, half dreaming, "Are you my daughter?" I'd always say no. But one night when she reached out her frail hand, I took it anyway. Because in that moment, I needed to feel like someone's daughter again, even if it was only a borrowed truth. The laundromat below me never stopped. Even at 3 a.m., there was always one machine spinning. The sound became a heartbeat, mechanical but constant, reminding me that time still moved forward, even when my life didn't. By the end of that winter, the city lights outside my window began to look softer. The fear that used to wake me in the middle of the night began to dull. It didn't fade, but it changed shape, from panic to quiet determination. I was still broken, still forgotten, still alone. But somewhere inside all that emptiness, I started to build something small, the first fragile outlines of a plan. By the time spring came, the air in Raleigh had turned heavy with rain, that kind that smells like metal and mud before it falls. I'd been living above the laundromat for almost 5 months. My life had narrowed to a pattern of small, predictable motions. Care for Mrs. Powell, buy groceries, wash uniforms, write in my notebook. There was comfort in repetition, but also danger, because stillness can turn into surrender if you're not careful. I refused to surrender. One night, after my shift, I walked to a 24-hour library branch downtown. I hadn't been there in years. The lights buzzed softly, and the air carried the faint smell of paper and rain-soaked wool. I logged into one of the public computers using an old email I hadn't touched since nursing school. Out of curiosity, I tried accessing my old clinic account, expecting the password reset screen to block me. But to my surprise, the login worked. Someone had forgotten to revoke my credentials. The inbox was nearly empty, wiped clean. But in the sent items folder, there was a trace, a single thread that hadn't been deleted, buried beneath hundreds of blank entries. It was an exchange between Larissa and the clinic's finance officer. The subject line was short: transfer authorization. As I clicked through, the details unfolded like a confession written in code. The transaction approvals, the supplier invoices, the forwarding notes. All of them matched the fraudulent trail that had destroyed me. Except the digital signatures didn't belong to me. They belonged to her. My sister had forgotten to purge one email from the archive. One careless mistake after a lifetime of perfection. My hands shook on the keyboard. The cursor blinked like a pulse. For the first time in months, I felt something close to power. Not vengeance yet, but clarity. I spent the next few days printing, saving, and backing up every trace I could find. I took screenshots, forwarded copies to new accounts, and stored the documents on a flash drive I kept hidden in my shoe. I didn't tell anyone, not even Daniel, who still checked in sometimes to make sure I was eating. I wanted this secret to be mine until I decided how to use it. At first, I thought about going straight to the police. But the idea didn't sit right. The system had already failed me once, arresting me without hesitation, believing the surface of Larissa's story because she fit the part better. I didn't want another investigation where I'd have to beg to be believed. I wanted truth to do the talking this time. So I waited. I spent nights walking home under the streetlights, rehearsing what I would do. I studied Larissa's social media, watched her build her new image, charity galas, business panels, the loving daughter smiling beside our parents. It was like she'd scrubbed the scandal clean and replaced it with a perfect life. I almost admired the precision. Almost. The plan came to me one morning in late May, as I folded Mrs. Powell's laundry. The hum of the dryer below vibrated through the floor, steady and rhythmic, like a countdown. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was in June. Larissa had been planning the celebration for weeks. An elegant dinner at our parents' house, catered, private, intimate. The same house where I'd been humiliated a year before. I decided I would go. I called my mother first, keeping my tone light. I said I wanted to make amends, to start over, to be part of the family again. There was a long pause before she agreed. I could hear the cautious relief in her voice, the kind that masks suspicion. She said Larissa would be happy to see me. I almost laughed. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I worked quietly, collecting the last details, the email records, the bank statements, the timestamps. I organized them into neat folders and printed one set for each family member. I sealed them in plain envelopes, labeled only with their names. I told myself I wasn't doing it to destroy her. I was doing it so that, for once, they would all see who I really was. On the night of the dinner, the house smelled the same as always: rosemary, polished wood, and my mother's favorite candle burning too strong in the hallway. My father greeted me at the door, hesitant but polite. Larissa appeared seconds later, flawless as ever in a silver dress, her smile calculated, her voice dripping with faux surprise. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Dinner passed in slow motion. The same rituals, the same hierarchy. Larissa at the center of conversation, my parents beaming with pride. I answered questions softly, smiled when appropriate, and waited. My cue came after dessert, when my mother stood to thank everyone for coming. The table was glowing under candlelight. I reached into my bag, pulled out the stack of envelopes, and placed them quietly beside each plate. No words, no explanations. Just the sound of paper sliding against the tablecloth. At first, no one moved. Then my uncle opened his, confusion shifting into silence. My mother's expression faltered as she read. My father's hand trembled slightly. And Larissa, she didn't open hers. She just stared at me, eyes cold, lips pressed tight, her face draining of color. The silence stretched long and heavy. Someone dropped a fork. Outside, a summer storm began to roll in, thunder low and distant. The air seemed to thicken around us. I stood, smoothed my dress, and said only one thing, that I thought everyone deserved to know the truth. Then I turned and walked out before anyone could speak. The rain had started by the time I reached my car. It hit the windshield hard, relentless. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, chest tight, with something between grief and release. For the first time in my life, I hadn't been quiet. I hadn't defended, explained, or begged. I had simply shown them what silence could reveal when it finally broke. The night of the dinner left a residue in the air. Something invisible but heavy, like the scent of smoke after a fire. I didn't sleep when I got home. I sat by the window of my small apartment above the laundromat, watching the streetlights flicker on puddles below. Rainwater streamed down the glass in restless trails, and every so often, a car passed through the wet silence. My phone stayed on the table, dark, until nearly dawn. The first message came from my mother. Short, careful. We need to talk. Then one from my father, longer but equally measured. He said he didn't know what to believe, that things had come as a shock. There was no mention of apology, no admission that they'd ever been wrong, just confusion, as though disbelief were safer than remorse. I didn't answer. By the next afternoon, the rest of the family knew. My uncle called to say he'd shown the documents to a lawyer friend. My aunt sent a quiet text. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. The news spread faster than I could track it. It was as if the truth had grown wings the moment I stopped trying to force it to fly. 2 days later, the clinic released a public statement. They were reopening the investigation into the fraud charges and suspending another administrative employee pending review. They didn't use Larissa's name, but they didn't have to. The timing spoke for itself. That evening, Larissa called. I watched her name flash across my screen and let it ring. Twice, 3 times. Then again the next morning. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies. Some things lose meaning once you know the person speaking them doesn't feel their weight. When the call finally stopped, I knew it wasn't over. Not in the legal sense. Not in the emotional one. But something inside me had settled. For the first time in a year, I wasn't living under her shadow. The police reached out later that week to verify the evidence I'd provided. I went to the station with everything neatly organized, each file labeled and time-stamped. The officer who'd once escorted me in handcuffs now nodded when he saw me. His tone was different. Not warm, but respectful. I didn't need his apology. The quiet acknowledgement in his eyes was enough. By the end of that month, the charges against me were officially dropped. The word cleared appeared on the letterhead like a benediction. I read it again and again, tracing the ink with my finger, as if touch could make it real. Larissa lost her position soon after. I didn't celebrate it. There was no satisfaction in seeing her fall, only a strange, aching quiet. I heard through relatives that she'd moved out of town, that she was taking time to recover. My parents didn't mention her again for weeks. When we finally spoke, my mother's voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard before. She said she'd made mistakes, that she didn't know how to fix what had been broken. I told her not to try. Some things aren't meant to be repaired, only understood. I went back to work that summer, not at the old clinic, but at a small community hospital on the other side of the city. My first day back, I stood in the supply room surrounded by shelves of gloves, syringes, and bandages. The familiar scent of disinfectant filled the air, sharp, clean, steady. The same smell that once reminded me of humiliation now felt different. It smelled like reclamation. I started walking home after each shift, taking the long route through the park just to hear the sound of leaves moving in the dark. The world felt wider again. Not softer, but honest. I wasn't healed, not completely. The betrayal still lived somewhere inside me, quiet but permanent, like scar tissue. But it no longer defined the shape of my days. Sometimes, I think about the night of the dinner, the envelopes, the silence, the look in Larissa's eyes when she realized she was seen. There was no victory in it, no cinematic ending, just truth laid bare under candlelight. And maybe that's what justice really is. Not applause, not revenge, just stillness after the noise. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone you loved betrayed you? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe healing sometimes begins in the quiet aftermath of revenge.